Do you think men who kidnap a child should be free in 10 years?
No, sir.
Do you think 2 men who rape a child should be free in 10 years?
No, sir.
Do you think 2 men who hang a child should be free in 10 years?
No, sir.
Well, what do you think should happen to them? What would be a fair sentence?
Objection,
do you think
Your
they
Honor.
deserve to die, Mr.
Your
Haley?
Honor.
Answer the question.
Buckley.
Carly,
Yes,
don't
they
answer
deserve
that
to
question.
die.
Yes, they deserve to die, and I hope they burn in hell.
A Mississippi lawyer takes on a case that seems unwinnable, defending a black man who killed the white men who raped his daughter. This week, we discuss if all good old boys are racist, if you need to provide references in a Ku Klux Klan application, and why we want to see Kiefer Sutherland get hit by cream pies. Then we find out if A Time to Kill stands the test of time.
Test of time, James and Alan have their say. Do the movies you love still hold up today? James says Gladiator with the glutton. Alan says as a father, blah blah. It's the test of time, James and Alan have their say. Do the movies you love still hold up today? Test of time, James and Alan have their say. Do the movies you love still hold up today?
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Test of Time podcast. My name is Alan Noah, and who are you, you handsome devil?
Thank you, Al. That's really sweet of you. I'm James Brief, and we're here once again, Test of Time. We're talking about movies. We're seeing if the movies that we used to watch still hold up today. How are you doing, Alan?
I am doing okay. Feel a little tired. Been a little busy this week, but, it's okay. Not going to complain. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. This week we're going to be discussing A Time to Kill, and that's based on a novel by John Grisham. Do you remember when John Grisham was so popular?
Yeah, I do remember when, his books were the big deal, and I have actually never read a John Grisham book, but I remember you would just hear about them, and if you walked by a Barnes & Noble or a B. Dalton or if you were in an airport, like those magazine/bookstores in the airport, there was always just a wall of 50 different John Grisham books.
Oh, I read most of his first books. I've mentioned it before, but I worked at Barnes & Noble when I was in high school. So in the late 90s, I was aware of every single bestseller because I used to have to shelve them every week. And you'd always have people asking for that. And it was probably the peak time for print books when Borders and Barnes & Noble were out. And I did read this novel.
Oh, okay, cool. Do you remember it?
I do remember this novel. I remember a couple things, and I will certainly talk about some of the differences with this and the movie. After the 90s and the heyday of print publications, I'd say that the novels kind of maybe died down a little bit until you had a couple blockbuster series like the Harry Potter series and the Hunger Games and Twilight and 50 Shades of Grey. I read most of the Harry Potters and I read most of the Hunger Games books. I don't think you read 50 Shades of Grey or Twilight. I didn't read those, but those certainly were blockbuster series that made blockbuster films.
I think I read maybe one page of 50 Shades of Grey, and it was horrifically bad. Everything about it, the syntax was bad, the descriptions were bad, everything about it just was awful, and I laughed, and then I put it down. That was the end of that.
I remember whenever that book came out, every time I saw someone reading a Kindle on the subway, I assumed that they bought the Kindle just so they didn't have to show everyone they were reading 50 Shades of Grey.
In New York City, people don't care. Really? I feel like Manhattanites just don't give a shit.
Maybe, but the authors of those books, they did something very interesting that even though we didn't really get into those series, I respect that they did something very interesting. They wrote it in closed series. Twilight was 4 books and 50 Shades was a trilogy, and they were blockbusters that I'm sure these authors did not expect them to be. And of course, once the last book is out, you're gonna want to milk it a little bit, and instead instead of putting a sequel to a story that I don't know if it ended well, but I'm sure it ended, they didn't write a sequel or even a prequel trilogy. They basically redid the trilogy, but from another character's point of view. Like, I believe the 50 Shades of Grey is from the woman's point of view. And then I remember I was in an airport and I saw there was a book, it was just called Grey, like from the character Christian Grey's point of view, who's the man. While I don't know what it's about, I find that kind of intriguing. And, I've mentioned it before that I find prequels to be kind of blah, because you already know what's going to happen. And it would be very interesting if more people did that instead of remakes or unnecessary sequels. I think, rewriting a story or doing a movie, the same story, but from a different character's point of view could be intriguing.
I think that's an interesting concept. I think you still sort of have that same issue you're talking about with the prequels, where you still know the main story beats. You still know that this beloved character is going to save the day, and this other beloved character is going to die, and this character is not going to die. There's still going to be some mystery that's just lost. You'd really need to have like a really interesting character with a really radically different viewpoint in order to make that interesting.
I agree with you on the fact that it doesn't work in every story, but there's a series that you and I have talked about that we find very intriguing, and it's Cobra Kai, the pseudo sequel to Karate Kid. And while I said that it's a sequel to the story, what Cobra Kai is kind of based on is I believe it's all based on an episode of, I think it's How I Met Your Mother, where Barney, the Neil Patrick Harris character, he has a completely different take on the Karate Kid, the first film at least. And he says that Daniel is the villain in it and Johnny is the hero. And, it kind of sounds like, oh, maybe you just like the dirtbag. And he actually makes a compelling case. I think that Cobra Kai, the series, does make a compelling case that from the character Johnny's point of view, there's a completely different theme that comes out, even though we're seeing the same story. It kind of made me think of movies that I don't need to see necessarily a new Matrix film, even though one is coming out this year. But, if you redid The Matrix from, say, Agent Smith's point of view, there's probably something there. And, I just think that maybe Hollywood could just rethink different films from other point of views rather than make an unnecessary sequel, prequel, or remake.
I'm looking over our list of movies that we've done on the podcast. The Goonies from the Fratellis' point of view. Okay, that could be fun.
The Fratellis, they presumably maybe own that property. There's buried treasure underneath their legal hideout, and these kids come and steal the treasure from them. I mean, you can at least make that point of view, but I mean, even just seeing like Star Wars from R2-D2's point of view, like what kind of stuff did he see? What was that like when he sees Luke Skywalker again and Obi-Wan Kenobi in Episode 4, and he knows the whole thing? Because remember, C-3PO, his memory's erased in Episode 3, but R2-D2, he's the only character that knows everything, and I think it could be very intriguing.
I don't know, because he's just like a droid that just beeps and boops. That's like Three Men and a Baby from the baby's point of view, which maybe I would watch. The Big Lebowski from Donnie's point of view, I'd love that. I would totally watch that.
It could be. And this is a film, I mean, we haven't reviewed this film, but Clint Eastwood, he directed a pair of films a couple of years ago, maybe, I don't know, like 10 years ago. He made a film called Letters from Iwo Jima, and then he made a companion film, Flags of Our Fathers. It's about the Battle of Iwo Jima from World War II. One side is the American side, and one side is the Japanese side. It could be interesting to see a Revolutionary War picture from some guy in England who's like, hey, our colonists are revolting against us. What's going on there? Whatever it is, there's always another point of view.
I hear what you're saying. I think it's a different option if you're going to milk a property. There's also that Cruella movie that's coming out, which is told from Cruella's point of view. It's not the same 101 Dalmatian story. It's a prequel, so not exactly the same, but that kind of thing. And look, I'm a sucker as much as the next guy for, milking IP, but in general, I would say better to do something totally original. But let's talk about a movie told from Matthew McConaughey's point of view. Even though he is not the top billed star in this movie, interestingly enough, let's talk about A Time to Kill. The top billed actor, by the way, is Sandra Bullock, which is kind of funny because she is definitely not the main character. She just doesn't even like show up in the movie till like half an hour in. I don't think she has any dialogue until like an hour or so into the movie. But I guess she was a bigger star in 96. She's coming off Speed.
But she wasn't even the star of Speed. That's fascinating. I had no idea that she was top billed. I thought you were going to say Sam Jackson, who also,
No.
I guess you could argue, he's kind of just coming off of Pulp Fiction.
Right. So this movie, in case people don't remember, as you said, it's based on a John Grisham novel, and it begins with a young black girl who's brutally raped and left for dead by two white racist men. The girl's father, Carl Lee Haley, who's played by Samuel L. Jackson, takes revenge on her attackers by shooting and killing the two men as they're on their way to trial. Haley is arrested, and he hires a young lawyer named Jake Brigance, played by Matthew McConaughey, to defend him. Brigance faces an uphill battle. The prosecutor's seeking the death penalty, the jury's all white, and the KKK terrorizes Brigance, his family, and his team. He enlists the help of a law student named Ellen Rourke, played by Sandra Bullock. He enlists the help of his mentor, who's played by Donald Sutherland. And he even has his friend, who's a shady divorce attorney, help him out too. That character is played by Oliver Platt. So I assume because it was based on a John Grisham novel, it did fairly well at the box office?
Oh, yeah. This movie was released on July 26, 1996. So this is in the middle of a blockbuster summer, and it was released as a blockbuster, hit. And it had a $40 million budget, decent budget for 96. And it opened at number one with $14 million. And it spent 2 weeks at number one. It actually, when it opened, it bumped from number one, a film that had been there for 3 weeks at number one. It was the biggest moneymaker that summer, and it's the first film we ever reviewed on the Test of Time podcast.
Independence Day.
That's right. It spent 2 weeks in number one, 7 weeks in the top five through Labor Day, and wound up grossing $108 million domestically and $150 worldwide. And, it's interesting, 108 domestic, when a movie only makes $150 million worldwide, a lot of times it's the comedy that doesn't really translate. And this film, I'm not really sure that the rest of the world would necessarily understand some of the nuances of, the Confederate flag and what it means to be in Mississippi, and even, the Ku Klux Klan. And maybe today people would know that a little more because race stuff has unfortunately been, front and center. But I understand why it made the bulk of its money in the States.
I can see what you're saying. Yeah, it does sort of seem like an American tale. I did sort of wonder as the movie was beginning if it took place like in the past, the 50s, the 60s or something, but it is set in present day meaning 1996. Although apparently in the book, it took place in the early 80s, I think.
I don't remember that. It does take place in relatively modern times because, it tries to establish that the Klan is back. And, the novel, I remember, takes a great deal to try to convince you that this is not a far-fetched thing. Unfortunately, we'll certainly talk about the context of that today. But one thing that surprised me in the credits, the director, this guy has popped up in our podcast a few times. This guy has made some fantastic films, and he's made some real stinkers. It's the late Joel Schumacher. I know I said The Lost Boys stood up. Did you say it stands the test of time?
I said that The Lost Boys did not stand the test of time.
Oh, well, I liked it, but we both agreed that his later Batman films, Batman Forever, and to a much greater extent, Batman and Robin did not stand the test of time.
Right. He also directed Falling Down. I think after Joel Schumacher passed away, on Twitter, I linked to our Falling Down episode. I was like, let's not talk about the terrible Batman movies. Let's talk about Falling Down, which was a much better movie.
So this film, A Time to Kill, it opens in the Deep South. It's Mississippi. It checks off all the boxes of kind of your scumbag racist. It's got a beat-up pickup truck. These two guys, one guy has a fantastic mullet, and the other one has, long hair. And they got the Confederate flag on the back of their truck. And they're driving, they're drinking beers. They're a bunch of, I guess you'd call them good old boys.
I think that gives Good Old Boys a bad name.
Oh, I think Good Old Boys is a bad thing. Good boys, that's a nice thing. Good old boys, I don't think, at least today, I've never heard it in a good context.
I mean, Dukes of Hazzard, those are the good old boys who would never mean no harm. They did have a Confederate flag on their car.
And it was called the General Lee. I mean, I don't think the Dukes of Hazzard, that show really stands up probably. But
probably not.
These guys are driving along and they see a little black girl, 10 years old, and they throw a full can of beer at her head. And that's practically throwing a rock at somebody from a car. And they kind of knock her out. They decide to go from dirtbags to barely human beings, and they go out and they brutalize this girl. They tie her up, they beat the crap out of her, they both take turns raping her, and they attempt to lynch her, which is basically to hang her over the tree branch. They're so incompetent in what they're doing, they fail at doing that. The branch breaks. They decide to throw her over a bridge, and she is found by a bunch of local townsfolk.
Yeah, this scene is horrific. It is brutal. It is terrible to watch. They do the camera angles like from the girl's point of view so that you're not seeing all of the terribleness, but then it is also in a way more terrible to see it from her point of view. It is just horrific. And this community of black people are horrified. They're shocked. And the girl throughout the attack is calling for her daddy, and her dad is Carl Lee Haley, played by Samuel L. Jackson. And he goes to talk to this lawyer, Brigance, Matthew McConaughey's character, and says, "You defended my brother a few years back. You didn't have to do that. You're a good guy. That other time when some white guys raped a little black girl, they got off scot-free, right?" And Brigance says, "Yeah." And then Carl Lee says, "If I was in a jam, you'd help me, right?" And Brigance doesn't answer, but it's implied that the answer is yes. And what Carl Lee means is that he's going to kill the men who attacked his daughter. And you absolutely understand why. You understand his rage. There was a little part of me that thought maybe he should wait and see what happens in their trial, because he kills them as they're walking into court. You understand that he thinks these guys are probably going to get off, maybe get a slap on the wrist or something like that. But from what I've heard in other movies, the guys who go to jail and are rapists or pedophiles, don't they get the shit kicked out of them in prison? Aren't they the lowest of the low?
I don't know. I feel like seeing a show like Oz, I feel like these guys could join the Aryan Brotherhood, and I think they'll be fine because they raped a black girl, and I think to a certain person in prison, these guys are unfortunately probably heroes, and maybe he would have gotten convicted, but maybe not.
Right. And so Carl Lee kills these two guys in plain sight of a whole lot of people. He uses a machine gun, and while he's killing these guys, he accidentally hits a police officer in the leg. At first, I wasn't sure if that cop was killed. He's not, but he basically had his lower part of one of his legs blown off, and he is an amputee from the knee down or around there. And the sheriff has to go and arrest Carl Lee. Carl Lee goes quietly. He knows what he's done. And Carl Lee wants Brigance to defend him. And Brigance feels guilty because Carl Lee told him what he was going to do. And Brigance came home and talked to his wife about it. And his wife said, "Well, you're going to call the sheriff, right?" And Brigance didn't do that. And the reason is because Brigance has a young daughter too. So he might say something like, as a father, if, his daughter was attacked, he'd want to kill the guys who did it as well.
This sheriff, by the way, Charles S. Dutton plays him. And I don't know if you know this actor, but he's always great in everything he does. You might remember him from a show in the mid-90s called Rock. Mm-hmm. He's always great. And someone else who's always great, the DA, the person that's going to be prosecuting Haley, is played remarkably by Kevin Spacey. And what a talent this guy was. We don't have to go into why he was canceled, but wow, is he scary. Just his presence.
Yeah, and he chews the scenery. You get the feeling that he loves these kinds of roles, and he lets like the Southern drawl out, and he is going to pursue the death penalty against Carl Lee because he killed 2 people in plain sight of a lot of witnesses. And I did think that it was interesting as a courtroom movie where there's no question about who really killed so-and-so. Like, we know. We saw it as the audience. The people in the town saw it. Everybody knows that Carl Lee killed these men. The question is it justifiable? Was he temporarily insane? And the theme that is repeated by Kevin Spacey's character and many characters in the movie is that, no, it is not okay to take the law into your own hands. This is vigilante justice, and vigilante justice is always bad. Except that one of the guys that Carl Lee killed has a brother played by Kiefer Sutherland, and he is furious about his brother's murder. And so he wants to do some vigilante justice of his own, and he decides to bring back the KKK. Apparently, the KKK has not been in this part of Mississippi in 10 years, but he decides he's going to bring them back. He goes and talks to the Grand Dragon, I think.
Yeah, that's the leader of the KKK, Grand Dragon. We saw the Grand Dragon in Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?
Right. This Grand Dragon is played by Kurtwood Smith, who we saw in RoboCop. I always think of him as the dad in that 70s show. And like the deal that he makes is, we'll bring the KKK back to your little corner of Mississippi. You just have to recruit, a handful of guys, of like-minded individuals. And so he goes home and he finds like his other redneck buddies and hands them paper applications.
I know, I love that. It's like putting your name down. I thought their whole point of wearing hoods is so that they could sort of remain anonymous in the public, but wow, this is dumb.
Do you need references?
Right, exactly. Like, it's a little ridiculous from our point of view, but I remember reading the novel and you're thinking the KKK is like something you read about from like the beginning of the 20th century. And there is even a line in the film where one of the guys goes, "You mean them skinheads who want to blow up the government?" And then Kiefer's character goes, "No, I mean some good old God-fearing Klansmen." Because they're called the Knights of the Ku Klux Klan. They actually spin it as like religious and some kind of like Christian nobility of defending the white race, blah, blah, blah bullshit. And you did need some convincing in 1996 that the Klan and these kind of people really still existed. Unfortunately, today, we saw people open, no hoods or anything, out in Charlottesville and, a lot of other places. And so, you almost don't need the hoods anymore.
That is the element that doesn't stand the test of time, is that these guys are so brazen and out and open with their racism. I mean, they're fucking storming the Capitol and taking selfies while they do it. There's no fear of retribution. There's no like desire for anonymity anymore, which is horrible that we have backslid so fucking much. But Brigance, he's taking this case and he works alone. He's got this mentor and Donald Sutherland, which, as a quick sidebar, it is kind of weird that Donald and Kiefer Sutherland are in a movie and they're not playing father and son. Like, they look alike. It's not just that, like, I know that they're father and son. They do have a familial resemblance.
I mean, I didn't mind seeing that. It actually took me a moment to realize they're both in the film.
I don't think the two Sutherlands share any scenes in this movie, so it's not like you see them next to each other at any point. But he's also got his buddy Harry Rex, played by Oliver Platt, who's a divorce lawyer, and they're not like legal partners, but like he kind of brings Harry Rex onto his team. And Oliver Platt is like always great. He's a great actor.
I think it's implied that they're law school buddies, because Jake Brigance, they make a point that he's a young lawyer, and it's almost hard to recognize because like people like Sandra Bullock and Matthew McConaughey, it's a little hard to imagine that these guys are like young, straight out of law school, and that Sandra Bullock is in law school, because they've aged so well and they look kind of the same today.
It's funny, Sandra Bullock is supposed to be like in law school, and Matthew McConaughey is supposed to be a couple years older because, you know, he's an established lawyer. He's got a wife and a kid. But in reality, Sandra Bullock is 5 years older than Matthew McConaughey.
And Matthew McConaughey has kind of a ridiculous blonde hair dye in this film. It almost looks like he's a young, like, punk rock star law student.
But that character that Sandra Bullock plays is Ellen Rourke, or she says that it's Rourke in Massachusetts, but Roark in Mississippi. And then for the rest of the movie, Brigance only calls her Roark. And she is an eager law student. She wants to help. And at first, Brigance says, no, no, no. But eventually he hires her because she's going to work for free. She's got a rich dad. And she quickly becomes a target for the KKK. Because, as they say later in the movie, they consider her like a traitor to the white race because she's helping defend this black guy.
Oh, I mean, Kiefer, he plays this evil role so well. Kiefer Sutherland, when he has stubble, is such a scumbag, you know, like in The Lost Boys and this. And I mean, he's the hero in 24, but he's not a real noble good guy. Like, he's never going to be the lead in a romantic comedy.
Or like a slapstick comedy. I want to see like Kiefer Sutherland like walk into a waiter who's carrying like 10 cream pies, you know?
Yeah. You know, you're not going to see that film.
No, you're not.
But Kiefer and his boys, they really bring the Klan back. I mean, they burn a cross in Jake's house, forcing Jake's young wife and young daughter to flee to the in-laws. They beat the shit out of Jake's secretary's husband, who actually dies from this attack. Not directly, but he like dies the next day because it's implied he has a bad heart, and the KKK is about to blow up Jake's house. And this is kind of the MO of these guys. You know, the Selma, the famous church bombing. Those cowards will just blow up your house when you're in there. And there is this anonymous guy that keeps calling and giving warnings. All you see is this guy has a Mickey Mouse tattoo. Right before Jake's house is going to be bombed, he goes, "I need to warn you, get out of the house."
It's weird, though, because they never identify who this guy is. There's never any, like, reason. There's never, like, any payoff. And it doesn't need much. I don't think you need to, like, really get, like, a whole backstory about him. But at some point, you feel like there should be a moment where someone says, "Who are you?" And he says, "Well, I'm in the KKK because my brother makes me go, but I could never do those horrible things, and that's why I've been helping." He needs like 60 seconds or less, you know, to just sort of wrap that up. And it is a weird, loose end that they just never tie up in this movie.
Oh, absolutely. And there's a perfect point in the movie at the end. What happens to one of the bad guys could easily be because Mickey Mouse helped them. But in the novel, I'll tell you that the KKK catches him and they torture him real bad and kill him. So, yeah, he does have an ending in the book.
Gotcha. We're not really talking about like the legal stuff, which is ostensibly what the movie's about. The judge in the case is named Judge Noose, which is like,
I didn't catch that. I actually didn't catch that. Judge Noose.
Yeah.
Oh
I mean, that's a hat wearing a hat. But you can tell that Judge Noose is sort of one of these, I would say, good old boys, where he wants to do things his way. He doesn't like Brigance. He seems to have a greater affinity for the DA. Buckley is the name of the character that Kevin Spacey plays. And Brigance wants to do a change in venue because the town that they live in is only 30% black, so that they're going to most likely have an all-white jury, which you would think, like, well, if the town is 30% black, then shouldn't the jury be 30% black? But they have these challenges that both sides are able to strike jurors. And this is a real thing that happens, and it's awful because as long as the DA doesn't say, "I do not want juror number 7 because he's black," they can't say that, but they can say, "I don't want juror number 7 because he's too young," even if he's the exact same age as, you know, all these other jurors that they don't strike. The striking jurors thing is kind of bullshit and has kind of been used for this exact purpose, to stack a jury one way or the other. And Brigance is left with an all-white jury, and that definitely makes his case a lot harder to defend.
Now, Grisham, he usually does his books kind of from different points of view of the legal system, and I'm pretty sure that there's a novel of his where it's all about picking the jury. They mention that here, that the entire trial is going to be won or lost based on if we can get a sympathetic person on this jury, because remember, in a capital murder case, it needs to be unanimous that the defendant is guilty. So they just need to find one sympathetic person, but it's really hard in this town because, like you said, the jury pool might be 30% black, but the actual jury winds up being all white and mostly men.
Yeah, and there's one guy in the jury who's clearly decided right from the get-go that he's going to say he's guilty. There's no doubt in his mind. You see him smile every time something happens in court that sort of like supports his theory. It's like the definition of confirmation bias. And we don't need to go into every detail of every little thing that happens in the courtroom, but there's basically two psychiatrists that come in, one for the prosecution and one for the defense, to testify that Carly is not or is insane. And the prosecution's psychiatrist, he says that Carly cannot be insane. But then Rourke breaks into his office and finds out that some people that he has said were not insane at trial are in his care at the insane asylum that he runs. So Brigance is able to discredit him. But then Brigance has his own psychiatrist who says that Carly was temporarily insane, but Buckley's able to discredit him by pointing out that he is a convicted felon because he was convicted of statutory rape many, many years ago.
Yeah, and outside of the courtroom, there's actually a lot of stuff going on. The KKK boys, they kidnap Rourke and beat her within an inch of her life and actually hang her arms by a tree and just leave her there to die and, slowly dehydrate and be eaten by animals. And it's only Mickey Mouse that comes back the next day and saves her. And also outside the courthouse, there's a lot of supporters of Haley. And then out of nowhere, the actual Klansmen, they start marching. And, you might think, arrest these guys. And no, you can't arrest them because there's a famous court case. It's actually called Skokie versus Illinois that gave neo-Nazis the right to march. And as long as you're not saying, like, kill this person, you're technically allowed to say that stuff. And as we saw a couple years ago, these guys in Charlottesville, they had every right to do that. They were able to say, Jews will not replace us, as long as they don't say, let's kill Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
It's interesting that you bring up Charlottesville. I mean, I was just getting visions of January 6th watching this. I guess that was different motivation, but you still had these white supremacists marching in the street. But in Charlottesville and on January 6th and in this movie, these Klansmen are not just in the streets yelling their racist beliefs. It turns violent. And this one trial has become like such a powder keg for this town. Speaking of powder kegs, that was a terrible segue, but the whole thing about the lighting crosses on people's lawns, I had always thought that that was just like meant to scare people and be like a symbol of don't fuck with the Klan kind of a thing. But from this movie, I think it's that it's supposed to burn the house down. I guess like in the South, if you're in an area that's really dry and the front lawn is dry, then the whole house could go up, which is what happens to Brigance's house.
Yeah, I always thought of it as what you said first. I think it was more of an intimidation factor because that is absolutely terrifying to have a flaming cross on your front lawn. But yeah, I guess it serves two purposes. It will also burn down your house.
It is a little bit of like a cheap thing where Brigance's house burns down and he's worried about his dog. And then, his buddy Harry Rex is like, your dog is dead and you're going to be dead too if you don't drop this case. Wait a second. Bark, bark. And then the dog comes running into frame and no, the dog's alive. And so is Brigance's hope.
Audiences want to see, they don't care on Independence Day, all of Los Angeles, 20 million people die, but that one dog is saved, and that's what the audience cheers for. It's amazing.
Right, right. But the case is winding down. Brigance thinks he's going to lose. He talks to Carl Lee, and Carl Lee explains to Brigance that the reason he hired him, the reason that he didn't replace him with some lawyers from the NAACP, which happened earlier in the movie, is that Brigance is white. And the only way that an all-white jury is going to be convinced that they should acquit Carl Lee is if a white lawyer tells them to. And he says, you think you're one of the good guys, but you're not. You're one of the bad guys. You don't see me as an equal. You see me as a black man, and that's how they see me. And so in order to get me off of this charge, you need to make them see what you see. And that inspires Brigance's closing argument, where he recounts in horrific, painful detail everything that happened to Carl Lee's daughter. He tells the jury to close their eyes and imagine it. He goes through step by step. I'm not going to repeat all of it because it is hard to hear. It's hard to envision. And then his capper is, so now imagine that little girl I was just telling you about, imagine that she's white. And then he rests his case, and then that's it. And it's this kind of like a mic drop moment. But really what he's saying is, if it bothers you that it's a white girl and not a black girl, then you're racist. That is the definition of the term. You can't feel differently depending on if the girl is white or black.
If you knew Matthew McConaughey at this point, you might have known him from Dazed and Confused and a couple other small roles. This scene was your preview that this guy is an Academy Award winner in about 20 years. What is it, 15 years later, he wins an Academy Award. It's a fantastic scene because we find out that this does sway the jury, and Haley is found innocent. And Justice Kiefer's character is like, all right, we're going to get them anyway. Charles S. Dutton's sheriff, they arrest them all. And the film wraps up pretty quickly because, one thing you were saying earlier when Carl was talking to Jake and being like, we're not friends. Our daughters are never going to play together. And the film basically ends with Jake bringing his daughter to Carl's house and saying, I think our daughters should just play together.
Right. The Haley family is having this big barbecue and they're all celebrating and the whole neighborhood's there and they're all black. And then the Brigances show up with some peach cobbler and they're just there to celebrate, to just hang out. And they let the daughters play and it tugs you in the feels like it's supposed to. And that's where the movie ends.
Yeah. So, that's John Grisham's A Time to Kill, Al. What do you think? Does this film stand the test of time?
Well, I think there's definitely a lot of good stuff in here. The acting is really great. Matthew McConaughey, Sandra Bullock, Samuel L. Jackson, they all do a great job. One thing that doesn't stand the test of time, you see the Mississippi state flag in a lot of the shots, and that state flag up until 2020 had the Confederate symbol in there. But last year, the people of Mississippi voted to finally remove that symbol from their state flag. I believe they were the last state to have the Confederate symbol in their state flag.
And they still kept it as a "In God We Trust" flag. That's what it says now.
Right. It's got a flower in it now. So, that doesn't stand the test of time. One thing that has absolutely nothing to do with standing the test of time or not, these people live in Mississippi. I don't think they have air conditioning in their houses. Brigance's wife, who's played by Ashley Judd, she is constantly dripping in sweat. He's doing all of his work on the house the whole time. Put in an AC unit. Your wife is melting. But really, my main criticism about this movie is that, just like we talked about a couple weeks ago in Glory, this is another white savior narrative movie. This is a movie about how racism is bad, but it's told from the white character's point of view. It's told from Matthew McConaughey and Sandra Bullock and Donald Sutherland's point of view. And Samuel L. Jackson has some great moments in this movie, but he's off to the side. I think he was nominated for Best Supporting Actor for a Golden Globe, which makes sense. He's a supporting actor in this movie. He is not a lead actor. And, in the beginning of the movie, we were talking about telling stories from different points of view. It's just like I said in Glory. I think this movie would have been 100 times more interesting if it was told from Carl Lee's point of view. He's got a really fascinating story. What's it like for this guy to know that his daughter was raped, brutally attacked, left for dead? Then he decides to go and kill these guys. Like, what's going on in that guy's head? I don't know. We only get like real little snippets about it, but we get like 6 scenes of Brigance like flirting with Sandra Bullock. Will they? Won't they? He shouldn't, but she's pretty. Will they? Won't they? I don't know. I mean, that's less interesting to me. And I'm sorry if I'm repeating some of the things I said in our Glory episode, but I really think this movie left a lot on the table and really could have been a lot stronger if it had told this story more from the point of view of Carl Lee and his wife and his family and his community, as opposed to Brigance. Also, the whole raping a little girl thing, I feel like is manipulative. Like, you're just sort of like writing a script and what's the worst thing we can imagine that will really make people feel something? I know, raping a little girl. There you go. And it works because, of course, it makes you think of something horrible. It's horrible. But it does feel a little emotionally manipulative to me. All that said, you can imagine the plot of this movie taking place in the 50s, 80s, 90s, today. I wish I could say that deep-seated racism wasn't a problem anymore, and therefore this movie doesn't stand the test of time. But it is still there. The hypocrisy, the double standard of vigilante justice is always wrong, except when the white guys do it. I mean, that's like a big theme in this movie. And it's true now. You know, Black Lives Matter protesters throw a brick through a window at a Target and people are all up in arms, but white supremacists raid the Capitol and, well, you know, they were upset. It's fine. Like, all that shit, unfortunately, does stand the test of time. So I'm going to say that the movie does stand the test of time. But I do think it could have been stronger. What do you think, James?
I'm going to talk a little bit about first the cast. This might be, of all the 250 films we've done, this might be the best cast and crew we've ever seen. Just on paper, we've got McConaughey, Oscar winner. You got Samuel L. Jackson. I mean, no question about him. He's a Golden Globe nominee. Sandra Bullock, she's won an Oscar and a Razzie, and she accepted her Razzie in person, by the way. I believe she won the Razzie the night before she won the Oscar, so good for her. She's cool. Kevin Spacey, 2-time Oscar winner. Kiefer Sutherland, he's won a ton of Emmys. Donald Sutherland, he's Academy Award nominee, Golden Globe nominee 8 times. Charles S. Dutton, he's won a ton of Emmys, Golden Globe nominee. Oliver Platt, Golden Globe nominee. He's won 4 Emmys and even a Tony Award. You've got Schumacher, he's got a bunch of Emmy noms. He almost won the Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival. And you've got the screenwriter Akiva Goldsman. He won the Oscar, I believe it was for A Beautiful Mind. He wrote the screenplay for that. I mean, this is an unbelievable cast, and whoever cast this film is brilliant because, this is not 2020 Matthew McConaughey and Sandra Bullock and even Samuel L. Jackson. And I think you can tell, Al, that the novel's better. Like you even said, there's so much missing in this film. What happens to this Mickey Mouse guy? I'll tell you that one thing the movie doesn't really get into is, I completely agree with why Haley killed these guys, but is it a legal defense? I mean, I think that the whole temporary insanity thing, I don't think you can even plea that anymore. I think that was like a 90s thing. I'm not sure they're still not guilty by reason of temporary insanity. I don't think they still do that. I could be wrong, and lawyers let me know. But I really wish that the film really expanded more on legally, why this is okay. I guess it does. But, you talk about you didn't like that this is a white savior film, but there was a whole subplot that the locals raise money and the NAACP raises money for a team of black lawyers that could better represent him. And Carl says, no, the only way I'm getting off is if a white person does this. And I think the point is that Carl's even saying this is such a racist country that only a white person could save me here. And, it's a little sad that that's true, but I think I agree with him. I don't think a black person making that argument, now imagine she's white, I don't think that would have worked. Unfortunately, I don't think to this jury, and we get a little insight, and you mentioned it, that the foreman is a total racist asshole. And I actually don't think the screenplay is that good. I think it's missing a bunch of stuff. Or maybe the original script is fine, but they cut out a couple subplots, and some stuff is just too long. I don't really care about Jake's family. And Sandra Bullock's character, when you told me she's top billed, I was like, what? Like, her character is, like, not in this film at all. You could write this character out, and the film barely misses anything. I'm gonna say the film stands up only because it's masterfully done. But I think that the film is really kind of superficial. It probably in 2003 wouldn't stand up. And I only think because of the events of the last 4 years that it really brings to mind, like, yeah, unfortunately, this is still here, and you don't need the 15 minutes of like, no, trust me, the Klan's a real thing, and people really do still lynch people in the South. Like, I unfortunately believe that stuff, and I also do believe the fact that we just saw a president get acquitted of something else probably, it seems to have been totally guilty on. So we do see this stuff happening, and unfortunately, I think that the events of the film do stand up, and the performances are just brilliant enough that it does stand the test of time.
You made me think of something there. When Carl Lee is talking to Brigance and saying only a white guy can convince the all-white jury that I'm not guilty, it's sort of like meta about the whole white savior narrative thing, which is that white American audiences are so racist that the only way they can get a movie that tells them that racism is bad is a movie where white people tell them that racism is bad. Like, that's why we have these white savior narratives at all, because it's so ingrained in people that the people who think they're the good guys, they're still kind of the bad guys, and they need to hear it from a white person. And, when you think about it, it is sort of like meta on the movie itself.
Yeah, and, imagine a parallel universe where Donald Trump was convicted. I only think that works when it's not Adam Schiff that's trying the case. I only think in that universe, you have one of the Republicans taking the lead manager case and trying Trump, and someone says, you cannot have a Democrat trying this case. It does not work unless you had a Republican talking to the Republicans and getting them to convict. I'm saying in a universe where he is convicted, I think it's a similar story. And I understand Haley's point of view there, that unfortunately it doesn't work unless you get these people to hear one of their own talk about how wrong this is. So, I see what you mean. It's a sad thing that we're seeing.
It's horrific. And I would have been so much happier to end this podcast by saying, well, of course this movie doesn't stand the test of time. Racism isn't a thing anymore. We didn't even touch on all of the sexism in this movie. It's less prominent, but there is a shit ton of sexism thrown towards Rourke.
Oh, yeah. And Al, after a movie of brutal rape of a child, murder, the Klan, horrible, horrible stuff, can we please go a different direction next week?
Yes, James. Next week, we're going to do the polar opposite of that. Next week, it's March. We're going to do March Muppet Madness. We're going to start with The Muppet Movie. I am so excited to watch The Muppet Movie. Then we're going to do The Great Muppet Caper, and then we'll cap off the trilogy with The Muppets Take Manhattan. It's March Muppet Madness. Get excited. Get pumped. I cannot wait to talk about these movies. Don't miss any of them. Make sure you're subscribed on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google, whatever place you listen to us on. Talk to us. We are at Test of Time Pod on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We want to hear what you have to say. Buy yourself some Test of Time merch, including a face mask. Are you double masking? You should be, according to the CDC. Get an N95 and then on top of it, a Test of Time mask. You can find the link on our website, testoftimepod.com. All right, see you next time, everybody.
Bye.